The sun unrelentingly beats down from its highest point of the day upon the three women trudging along the Bethlehem Judah road. Dust clouds blossom behind them with each halting step that they take, though their feet barely leave the ground. And they have been on this journey since the sun rose over the eastern horizon. The women walk silently, save for their weeping. Naomi, the older woman, weeps her grief over the death of her husband and her two sons. The two younger women trailing after her weep their tears of mourning too. They grieve the deaths of their husbands, the sons of Naomi. And they mourn for the children they have never had and now may never have. These are Moabite women, but they are following Naomi to Bethlehem because they love her like she is their own mother, and they do not want her to be alone. Naomi stops and turns to face them. Go back, she said. Each of you, go back to the house of your mothers. Tears streak her cheeks, marking the trail of all that she has lost in Moab. No, the two women answer her, we will never leave you. And Naomi sits on a rock and weeps. She wants them to go back to their families because she has no way to provide a life for them. She cannot give them food or shelter. She cannot keep them safe, especially since among the Israelites, these Moabite women are the enemy. And she has no more sons for them to marry. She has no way to secure for them a future of well-being. Naomi weeps, knowing what her life will be like. In the ancient Near East, a woman either lived with her mother and father, with her husband, or with her children. A woman, particularly an older woman, who did not live with mother or father or husband or children, was left on the edge of society, like grain left on the outermost edge of a field. True, she could go to her extended family, but unless she was young and was able to remarry, she would only be seen as a burden. A burden likely to be neglected because the average farm family in the ancient Near East, as in some farm families still today in different parts of this world, was one bad harvest away from losing their homes and possibly their lives. And that's the reason why widows, like orphans and immigrants, were likely to suffer hunger, neglect, abuse, and an early death. But as hard and despairing a life as it would be for Naomi, she knew it would be worse for Orpah and Ruth because they are Moabites. And she knows that no Israelite will welcome them or allow them to live in their home. She knows they will be the despised outsiders. She knows they will be seen as the migrant coming to take away jobs and food out of the mouths of Israelite children. She knows they will be seen as ones who will lead those Israelites they meet to turn away from God and turn toward worshiping idols. And Naomi loves them much too much to invite them into that kind of life. And so she begs them to go back to their own families, where they at least have some hope of remarrying, some possibility of a secure future. Orpah heard the wisdom in Naomi's words, and so she kissed Naomi goodbye, and with a heavy heart began walking back to Moab and back to her people, weeping as she walked. But Ruth clings to Naomi. Do not press me to leave, Ruth cries. Do not tell me to turn back from following you. Don't urge me to abandon or forsake you. Stop trying to get me to abandon my loyalty and my commitment to you and to God. Where you go, I go. I will never leave you alone. Where you lodge, I lodge. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. There is only one God, and I proclaim the Lord is my God, just as the Lord is your God. And I will worship and obey only this one God. And where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. So even death cannot separate me from you. Ruth willingly gives up her family, her kin, her faith traditions, her culture. Everything that gave her identity, everything that gave her life meaning, because she loves Naomi and is more concerned for Naomi's well-being than she is for her own well-being. Ruth had chosen to be a member of Naomi's family and find her identity and the meaning for her life with them. And she did that in the moment she married Naomi's son. Ruth had also chosen to be a member of the covenant community of Israel by declaring her trust in God and promising to obey, bless you, and worship only the Lord. And in making these choices, Ruth dies to her old life as a Moabite. And with her first step alongside Naomi, Ruth affirms this new life and lives her new life as an Israelite in the fullness of what it means to live the covenant handed to Moses. This covenant of 10 commands making up the two intertwined, inseparable commitments of loving only God and loving neighbor. And yet Ruth's new life promises only hardship and suffering in the present. She knows she may not be welcome in Bethlehem. She may not have a home. She may be hated. But she still goes with Naomi. And there is nothing logical, there is nothing rational in the tremendous risk she is taking. And be assured she is risking her life. Ruth has no guarantee everything is going to be just fine, or that her future is assured. At best, her future is uncertain. At worst, it is non-existent. But in this moment, Ruth's only concern and the commitment of her life and her actions is for Naomi's well-being, flowing from a love and loyalty that has no basis in logic or rationality, but comes from faith. That's the key reason the book of Ruth, you see, is such a compelling story of faith. For this poor, widowed outsider Ruth, who doesn't belong wedged in the middle of Israel's community life story, is living deep within her the two commandments Jesus tells the Pharisees and the scribes are the greatest. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the other one is just like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. With her simple declaration, there is only one God, and I proclaim the Lord is my God, Ruth affirms her relationship with God. She affirms that she trusts God is good all the time. That God is faithful. God is steadfast in loving her and Naomi. She affirms that God is merciful and compassionate. is present with her and Naomi, will provide all they need for living, and is committed to their well-being. She proclaims by her actions that she doesn't need to worry, she doesn't need to fret, she doesn't need to fuss about her future, because that is in God's hands, even as her present moment is in God's hand. And with her refusal to leave Naomi, Ruth exemplifies loving your neighbor as yourself in the fullest understanding of what such love means. Indeed, Ruth's very name means friend, as well as full to overflowing. And clearly, Ruth's self-giving love for Naomi overflows to such an extraordinary extent that Ruth is willing to let go of her past to persistently cling to Naomi, making Naomi's needs Ruth's needs, making Naomi's concerns Ruth's concerns. And Ruth's overflowing love does not diminish either she or Naomi, but seeks to make each of them whole together, because they are linked to each other in an intricate web of mutuality. And such love as this cannot be required, cannot be demanded, cannot be coerced. Nor can such love as this be considered as something one deserves to be given. For such love as this is given as a gift, expressly for the well-being of the other person. This gift is the instrument of God's blessings for life and hope. And certainly Ruth was the instrument of God's blessing of life and hope, turning around Naomi's life. Naomi may indeed bitterly lament that God's hand is turned against her, and the emptiness, the barrenness, the hopelessness she is currently experiencing, echoing the strident tones of Job and his three friends and all throughout time and place, those who also have felt abandoned by God. Even her name, she refuses the name Naomi. She wants to be called Mara. Call me bitter, because that's what I am. But it is through Ruth's love that God will turn Naomi's sorrow into joy, her emptiness into abundance, her hopelessness into a sure and certain hope for a future, for a new life of well-being, not just for Naomi, but for the world. That's the lesson, you see, that Jesus is also teaching his disciples while they walked along the stony path that he trod. From the moment Jesus stood on the shore calling Peter and the brothers Zebedee to follow me, Jesus was really calling them to drop their nets, leave their boats, leave their families, leave everything that gave them identity and meaning for their lives, so they might find families, their identities, and the meaning for their lives in building a new community. A community whose foundation in life together is based upon God's love for them and their grateful, obedient response of loving God with the entirety of their lives, intertwined and inseparable from a self-giving love and commitment to each other's well-being and the well-being of all people everywhere in the world. Jesus' disciples had no idea what their future was going to be like when Jesus called them. But like Ruth, they took a tremendous risk in following Jesus, and it wasn't logical, it wasn't rational. But like Ruth, they did it. And though we have no more certainty about our future, no more guarantee that everything will just work out fine for us and some happy ending, Jesus still calls us to make the only concern and commitment of our life, of our actions, of our love, serving other people's well-being. Whether we build a habitat house, whether we do a reach work camp, visit a woman or man who are unable to leave their homes, encourage children to trust God through a vacation Bible school, guide people to find freedom in being able to read and write, whether we give to the Red Cross or Presbyterian Disaster Assistance Relief for those who have been suffering so much in the hurricanes, or that we simply see in a moment, a fleeting, small moment, a neighbor in need, and respond as Mark did. Mark was walking home from school one day when he saw the boy ahead of him trip and drop the books he was carrying along with a couple of sweaters, baseball bat and a glove, and a small tape recorder. Mark knelt down and helped the boy pick up the scattered stuff. And since they were going the same way, Mark carried part of the burden. And as they walked, the boy said his name was Bill, and that he loved video games, baseball, and history, and that he was having a lot of trouble with his other subjects, and that he had just broken up with his girlfriend. And they arrived at Bill's home first. And so Bill invited Mark to come in for a Coke and maybe watch some television. And the afternoon passed pleasantly with a few laughs and some small shared talk. And then Mark went home. And they continued to see each other around school. They had lunch together once or twice. And then both of them graduated from junior high school to high school. And they continued seeing each other off and on during the 4 years of high school. And when they finally came to that awaited senior year, 3 weeks before graduation, Bill asked Mark if they could sit down and talk. And Bill reminded Mark of the day that they had first met. And he said, "Do you ever wonder why I was carrying so many things home that day?" And Mark sort of, shrugged and didn't know. And Bill said, "You see, I cleaned out my locker because I didn't want to leave a mess for anyone else to clean up after me. I had stored away some of my mother's sleeping pills, and I was going home that afternoon to commit suicide. But after we spent some time together talking and laughing, I realized that if I killed myself, I would have missed that time and so many others that might follow. So you see, Mark, when you picked up my books that day, you did a lot more. You saved my life." Mark was not thinking about saving a life that day. In that small, fleeting moment, Mark, like Ruth, became the instrument of God's blessing of life and hope for another person. And out of the many questions that we and theologians might think are important to ask ourselves as we read Ruth's story, I think the most practical and important question for all of us is, will we be aware of that small, fleeting moment this week that will present us with the opportunity to be the instrument of God's blessing and life and hope for another? Will we be someone's Ruth this week? Will we be someone's Christ this week? Amen.